8.5 million people share 300 square miles in New York City, and almost none of them will ever say, "Excuse me." With Manhattan alone packing roughly 70,000 people into every square mile, making it the densest county in America, every rudeness ranking, every travel blog, every person who visits for a long weekend comes away with the same conclusion that New Yorkers are cold, dismissive, and borderline hostile. Nobody smiles at you on the street, nobody holds conversations in checkout lines, and if you stop in the middle of Times Square to check your phone, someone will absolutely let you know about it. But what most people never consider is that this might not be rudeness at all. What looks like hostility could actually be a completely different social operating system. One built specifically for a world where 70,000 people occupy every square mile of Manhattan. We're going to break down the actual psychology behind why New York feels the way it does, what researchers have documented about this behavior for over 50 years, and why the city that seems like it doesn't care might demonstrate more care than anywhere else in the country. Manhattan holds roughly 70,800 people per square mile, which makes it the most densely packed county in the entire United States. Brooklyn sits around 36,000 per square mile, and the city as a whole averages about 29,000. Those numbers alone tell part of the story, but MTA ridership data tells the rest. In 2024, the New York City subway system, operated by the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, recorded 1.195 billion rides, and on any given weekday, about 3.37 million individual trips happened underground. What that means for a single person heading to work is staggering. Between your front door and your office, you encounter potentially hundreds, maybe thousands of micro-interactions. People crowd the sidewalk. People press against you in a subway car. People fill every inch of the line at the coffee shop. Treating every one of those interactions the way you would in a small town, with eye contact, a smile, a "how are you," a "you first, no you first," would leave you emotionally bankrupt before lunch. That realization isn't just common sense either, because a psychologist named Stanley Milgram figured it out back in 1970. Milgram, the same researcher famous for the obedience experiments, published a paper in Science magazine called The Experience of Living in Cities. Inside it, he laid out something called urban overload theory, and the argument was straightforward. The human nervous system carries a finite capacity for processing stimuli, and cities like New York overwhelm that capacity constantly. Residents develop adaptive behaviors not because they lack decency, but because their brains physically cannot handle full social engagement with every person they pass on a given block. The specific adaptations Milgram identified tell you everything. People allocate less time to each social input. They disregard low-priority interactions. They shift responsibility to institutions, and they construct what he called filtering devices, which are social barriers that manage the constant flood of input. His exact words were, "City life is a continuous set of encounters with overload and of resultant adaptations." Notice what Milgram didn't call it. He never used the word rudeness. Adaptation was his framing, and that single distinction changes everything about how you interpret what's happening on a New York sidewalk. 7 years before Milgram published that paper, a sociologist named Erving Goffman introduced a concept in his 1963 book, Behavior in Public Places, that might be the single most useful idea for understanding New York City. He called it civil inattention, and it works like this. When you're walking down the street and someone approaches, a brief moment occurs at about 8 feet away where you visually acknowledge their presence with a quick glance, and then you deliberately withdraw your attention. You look down, look away, keep moving. That tiny ritual accomplishes enormous social work because it communicates 3 things at once. I see you, I'm not a threat, and I respect your space enough to leave you alone now. What outsiders read as New Yorkers ignoring them is actually a highly calibrated behavior that maintains order in one of the most crowded places on Earth. Goffman drew a clear line about what genuine rudeness looks like inside this framework. Staring counts as rude, street harassment counts as rude, and conspicuously looking through someone as if they don't exist counts as rude. But glancing and moving on, that's the system working exactly the way Goffman described it should. Robert Levine, a psychologist who published A Geography of Time in 1997, measured the pace of life across 36 American cities and 31 countries using three indicators: walking speed on downtown sidewalks, postal worker efficiency, and willingness to help strangers. New York City ranked as the fastest-paced city in the United States, and Levine's data revealed a clear pattern. Larger, more economically active cities produced faster paces of life, and faster pace correlated with lower scores on helping stranger measures. On the surface, that sounds damning. Faster means less helpful, but Levine's own interpretation pushed deeper than the headline number, because it wasn't that fast-paced city residents refused to help. Their help just looked different. It came quick, it came direct, and it came efficient. A New Yorker won't ask about your day, but they will give you precise, unsolicited directions when you look lost, at Grand Central Terminal, delivered not with warmth but with accuracy. And that observation gets us to the core idea behind all of this. There's a phrase that floats around in conversations about New York. New Yorkers aren't rude, they're efficient. Nobody knows who said it first, and it's become a kind of cultural proverb at this point. But it captures something real about how the city operates. Most American cities, and especially smaller towns, run on what you could call a politeness-based social contract, where you say please and thank you hold doors, you make small talk, and the warmth itself is the whole point. New York runs on an efficiency-based social contract. And the unspoken agreement goes like this: I won't waste your time, you won't waste mine, and if I bump you, we both keep moving because we both have somewhere to be. Directness under this system isn't disrespect. It's respect for your time expressed through action rather than words. The data backs this up too, because New York consistently shows the highest rates of phone absorption and close body language in public among US cities. And researchers classify those patterns as functional adaptations to density rather than antisocial traits. A 2017 study out of Arizona State University flipped the whole narrative by finding that higher population density actually correlates with what they called slow life strategy investments, meaning people in dense urban areas pour more energy into quality relationships and personal development, not less. The surface coldness masks deeper relational investment underneath it all. This is where a hard line needs drawing, because there is a real difference between perceived rudeness and intentional disrespect, and conflating the two is where most people go wrong when they talk about New York City. A New Yorker who walks past without smiling is practicing civil inattention, exactly the way Goffman described. A New Yorker who shoves you and tells you to move is being genuinely rude. Those behaviors can look similar to outsiders, but the psychology behind each one and the intention driving it are completely different things. Research on rudeness spirals confirms that density does create real problems, though. A 2024 study from the University of New Mexico showed that witnessing rude behavior makes people more likely to behave rudely themselves, which means a city with this many daily interactions will naturally amplify genuine incivility alongside the perceived kind. But here's the thing about New York's trajectory. While specific ranking methodologies vary across surveys, the general perception data suggests the city has been making measurable improvements in how visitors and residents experience social interactions. If New Yorkers don't show care through words, the question becomes how they show it at all. And the answer lives in what happens when things go wrong. On September 11, 2001, 57,000 Red Cross team members mobilized in New York City, and most of them were brand new volunteers. Strangers held hands with grieving families, people shuttled volunteers to Ground Zero. Others hauled supplies while carrying their own injuries. Civic events called Listening to the City drew over 5,000 participants just to help shape what Lower Manhattan would become. That same energy surfaced again during Hurricane Sandy in 2012. When neighbors who had literally never exchanged a word knocked on each other's doors to check on the elderly, shared generators without being asked, and organized informal supply chains from nothing. And you see a quieter version of this every single day in neighborhoods like Harlem and the Lower East Side, in the bodega relationship, that wordless transactional bond where your deli guy knows your order, hands you a free coffee when you're clearly having a terrible day, and has never once asked how you're doing. None of that registers as warmth in a survey. All of it registers as care and practice. There's a version of this conversation that compares New York to the concept of Southern hospitality, that warm and welcoming culture where you feel embraced the moment you walk in. That warmth is real. Nobody disputes it. But researchers have pointed out that performative politeness can mask passive aggression and social judgment, while directness leaves almost nowhere to hide. New York doesn't operate on a politeness-based system, because a politeness-based system would collapse under the weight of 70,000 people per square mile. What replaced it isn't rudeness at all, it's calibration. It's a city that figured out, through decades of density and pressure, exactly how much social energy each interaction actually requires, and then refused to spend a single unit more than that. Stanley Milgram called it adaptation. Erving Goffman called it civil inattention. Robert Levine measured it in footsteps per second. New Yorkers just call it Tuesday.